Hello, everyone. Welcome to Burn the Wagon. We're here to burn the wagon that is capitalism, patriarchy, and colonialism. Today, my guest is Tisina, and your last name Parker, right?
Yep.
Parker, cool. So we're gonna get into it. I'm just do a little quick prayer real quick before we get started, and then we'll get started on the questions. So I want to send some love out there for anyone that is suffering from mental health issues. I want to send love to anyone that is suffering from domestic violence. I want to send love to anyone that has been missing or has been murdered. I want to send love to yourselves for being here today. I also want to send love to Mother Earth for allowing us to do this, all of us here today. So today, Tisina Parker. So thank you for joining me today. So we'll just start off with a little intro about yourself and where you're from, and then we'll go from there.
Okay. Huyako, kanen oyahinti, Tisina Tatuyang Parker. Enema mariposa awani, kani miwa awani kashai kukari kari. Yahweh, 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 Temanas. Hello, my name is Tisina Parker. Tisina Tatuyang Parker. My name is Eagle Woman by Bubbling Waters. It's a Lakota name. In my self-introduction, I actually speak in 3 languages. Southern Sierra Miwok from Yosemite, and a few words of Kashaya Pomo, and a few words of Paiute. And those are my 3 tribal groups from Yosemite, Mariposa area, born there and raised there. And then from my grandfather's side, I'm Miwok and Paiute. And from my grandmother's side, I'm Kashaya Pomo from Santa Rosa area. And yeah, I'm really happy to be here with you.
I was gonna say I understood one word in there, that mariposa. I was like butterfly. Yeah.
Oh yeah, in Spanish. I'm speaking Spanish too.
Yeah. I was like, I understood that. You know what I mean? And obviously Yahweh, thank you.
Yeah.
So I try to implement that as much as possible. And I just learned that Yahweh Yake Apede is thank you creator or something like that, right?
All right.
I think in that song that we were talking about, I think
Clarence says that.
Yeah. So I just learned that from Bernadette. So and I got it written down in here too. So I'm trying to say that as much as possible and then try to implement that into the podcast too.
Love that. Love it. Yeah.
Okay, let's start off with the first question. So recently you've been doing a lot of top knots, and I kind of want to get into that and who wears that and traditionally the significance of those things and stuff like that. So the top knots and your story behind that.
Yeah. So the top knot making is traditional California regalia from tribal groups, coastal areas. So from my Pomo side, that's my grandmother's side. And the top knots, I'm still learning from my teacher, who is Sean Joaquin Patty, and he's Hopland Pomo. And I have a background in fashion and textile design. So I went to school for fashion and textile design, but I always really wanted to work with regalia specifically. And there's a big, sort of greenwashing of sustainability in fashion that says all of these clothes that we make in factories they can be sustainable. But the real truth is that on an industrial scale, nothing can be sustainable.
Yeah.
So to me, the representation of traditional California regalia was always what the core of regenerative and sustainable clothing was, because it comes directly from the earth and it will return to the earth. And the sacredness of our regalia comes from our interaction and our knowledge of living with our animal cousins, and how to use those animals when they give their life to us for food and for clothing and for adornments for us. And so I had reached out to Sean Patty about learning top knots. And he was kind of funny. At first he said yes, and then then he ghosted me because because this is all on Facebook Messenger, right? And so we're all trying to vet each other. It's well, who are you? What do you want from me? And but I'd previously already learned how to tan hides, and so I sent him some photos of me tanning hides, and so it's oh yeah, this girl's legit, she's serious, right? And then he finally messaged me back, and he's yeah, why don't you come up and visit, and I'll show you about the feathers. And I had been collecting feathers for a little bit, and from my fashion and craft background, I have been trained as a weaver, been trained as a textile designer and knit. And so I really was using those skills to transfer into making of regalia. And my goal with the top knots is that all of the feathers come from wild birds. So in the top knots that I'm making right now, and that they're from a variety of birds. I have a top knot from a barn owl and also red-tailed hawk, and wild turkeys are really prevalent in California, and they're not native to California. And there's not a big hunting culture in California anymore, but you see wild turkey feathers in a lot of California regalia because they're really prolific in the environment, and people, use them for their capes, for their top knots, for all kinds of feather work. So yeah, I'm still learning about the significance of like what each bird means and why we use certain birds. And obviously the flicker feather is like really sacred to California native people. Those are,
with the chishkale too.
Yeah, with the chishkale, nice. And those are more rare to come by. But part of the process of top knot making is also learning how to gather and learning how to hunt if you hunt. And I'm not a hunter, but I collaborate with other people who hunt. I've actually been collaborating with people who are the founders of Hunters of Color, and they're actually one of the founders is from Sonoma County. And so I'm starting to like make connections with people who are ethically hunting in California. Some of them are native people, some of them are not native people, and sourcing feathers in that way. And then the top knots, what I learned from Sean is that he really studied the technique of the making in a way that I was like, this is it, because when we see something in either an archive of a photo or in a museum, as a maker, you're like, oh, how did they do that, right? How did our ancestors do that? And there's lots of ways that people will try to come up with that, like sewing techniques or like creating a dream catcher and like, putting the feather, but you have to think about like, well, we didn't have scissors, we didn't have metal needles, so people made techniques that, with the tools that they had and the materials that they had. And the technique that he came up with is like 100% the way, because it's a rhythmic knot tying that makes complete sense. As far like you don't need tools to do it, and it's really methodical, and the construction of the top knot is like flawless. So that was like a lot of what he showed me in the process, and then I've been learning more about how to source collecting, and then since I've been doing the top knots, a lot of people have been contacting me. We found this roadkill. Like by that day, I was actually doing a top knot workshop, and I was heading up to Point Reyes where I had the workshop. And my cousin, who is she's enrolled in Kashaya, and she also is a tribal monitor. So she's out on the road, doing her stuff. And she's like, "Oh, I just drove by a turkey. Like he looks pretty good. Do you want me to get him?" And I was like, "Yeah, get him." And then so she picked him up and put him in her trunk, and I met her at Trader Joe's in Petaluma, and like I'm like taking this dead bird in my car, and I'm like, yeah, this is what I do now. Just take roadkill, At
TJ's just with some turkey.
A bloody turkey, but actually he was in pretty good condition, and when I took him to the ceremony, Sean and Julina, who I also work with, Julina Costa, they sang him a song and we did a little ceremony before we plucked his feathers. And so, that, for me, the top knot is like, it's all a process of learning with community, learning about the animals, learning how to source the animals, and then also learning. There's learning of ceremony and language that I also feel called for, partly because in the sacredness of the animal, I feel a need to like give a prayer in my traditional languages or a song, excuse me. And I don't have one. So to me, that's telling me like, I have to learn, I have to learn one, so I can honor the animal that's giving its life for the regalia, for the top knot.
Absolutely. Growing up, I always thought that owls were like bad luck. Yeah. And I asked Sean this a while back, and he gave me a really good answer. But I also just want to ask you too, just to get it on the video. Yeah. But yeah, I always thought that they were bad luck. Is that true or? Well,
so a lot of California tribes believe that there are some tribes in California that do use owl, and Sean knows that within his tribal group of Hopland, Band, and Pomo, that there's actual documentation of ancestors of his using owl. Oh, okay. So I think that's debatable, And for me, I don't have a story like that, like a strong story of like, oh, I know that my ancestors did, right? But my story of the owl and the top knot that I have, I wish I had it here with me because I could show it to you. It's a really beautiful barn owl, and I was actually living here in Santa Cruz, and this was like in my 20s. I was taking a drawing class at Cabrillo, and I was up at Moon Rocks, and I was up there drawing, right?
Yeah.
And it was like a large scale drawing. I was up there drawing, and it was the project was a self portrait. And I was drawing myself with an owl mask on, and it was in a city where like the background of the city is like all chaos and destruction, and it was sort of like the calling of myself, of the dissonance between like intersecting with the urban life and then also what that meant as like a spiritual death, So that's what the drawing was about.
That's
and
cool.
I come around the corner, and right there, sitting on a rock right in front of me, is a beautiful barn owl. And it was in the middle of the day, and it was just sitting there. And it turns and looks at me, and then we like lock eyes for it felt like a few minutes,
Wow.
Probably like 10 seconds or 15 seconds, And then it flew away, and it was so beautiful. I was like, wow, that's so random. Like, how did I see this barn owl just chilling out here in the middle of the day when I'm drawing an owl?
Yeah.
Right? And
That's crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. And like, it was like a pretty like profound moment. And I've had a few of those where I was like, I've seen a bald eagle a couple of times, out in the wild. And like, that's really magical too. Or animals that are just super sacred or super powerful. And when I gathered the feathers, someone had given me a bunch of barn owl and great horned owl feathers. And when I went to visit Sean said, let me see your feathers. And I like showed him my feathers, and he was just like this happens to everybody. It's not enough. It takes about smaller feathers, like 70 to 80 feathers to create a top knot, and bigger feathers like turkey feathers, you can do it with less, like 50 or 60. But it takes a lot of feathers. And for the top knot, we use just the wing and the tail. So there's a lot of feathers on the bird that don't get used in the top knot.
Wow.
And so we've estimated for one bird, you need about like maybe 4 to 5 birds to make one top knot. And so, I didn't have enough, of any one kind of feather. I had some red-tailed hawk, some barn owl, some great horned owl, a few other type of like ravens. And then he just laid out his feathers and said, like, choose what you want to use. And then we had a discussion, and I like shared that story with him. And then I just felt really called to the owl. And I did know about that, like people saying, oh yeah, we don't use owl feathers, right? There are indigenous cultures that believe that the owl represents death. And the barn owl specifically has a really loud screech. And so that sound is it kind of is scary in the middle of the night. And so people think like, oh, it's a messenger of death, that the owl means death is coming, right? And from I'm like in this place where I'm like trying to welcome the idea of death as part of the cycle of life. And that we shouldn't fear death, right? Death is going to happen to all of us. And if we're lucky enough, we might live to be elders, but not everybody's going to make it that far. But death is a part of life, and it's the cycle of renewal when, new babies are born into the world, but none of us can escape death. And so I don't think it's something to be feared. I think it's something to be honored and respected, and to be known and to be understood. And I didn't really like consider that in my belief with the owl, and I also don't have any like specific beliefs from my tribal group that says don't use owl. So I just felt called to use those feathers, and then learning more about the barn owl afterwards. Barn owls mate for life, and
I didn't know that.
Yeah, some birds mate for life. They mate for life, and the male, when the mother is nesting, will go out and collect food and get food for the babies and the mother to feed the whole family until the babies are big enough to fly and leave the nest.
Wow.
And so to me, that really felt like a story of like calling the men back into community to be, to be the people, or to be the ones that are caring for the family and to be present for the family.
I dig it. That's amazing. I didn't know that about owls.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Wow.
They're beautiful animals too,
yeah.
you know.
My whole life, I just like walking afraid of owls. Just like, don't, if you hear one, don't look at it. It's like,
yeah.
But it's like when you're making a top knot, you can't have multiple bird feathers in one top knot.
You can.
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, you know, sometimes like when we're thinking about tradition, like when we're only left, that's okay. We're only left with a little bit of evidence in some cases to determine what is traditional, right? And one of the things that I know working in culture is that culture is constantly evolving and changing, right? We always changed as cultural people. Like our traditions were forever evolving, and that's what a living culture does, right? So it's not stagnant. It's just like we did it this one way and now we can never do it any other way, and we can never change, you know. It's like that's not how culture works. And you know, with contemporary top knot makers, like they're making design choices. Like Sean has some really beautiful examples where he's mixing different type of feathers, or it's like raven, or with like, you know, it's accented with flicker feathers, or you know, like really beautiful design choices. And you can mix feathers, and you can have that, you have that right as a contemporary Native person to make those decisions, you know. That's
cool.
Yeah,
I never thought about it. I see some of his stuff, and then the necklaces he made, the clamshell, like he has a traditional way of doing it without like a machine. Yeah, it's like, that's crazy to watch.
Yeah, I'm learning that from him too. Like the regalia projects that I'm working on, and my goal is to reskill in all of the traditional making for the full riggins for a woman specifically, you know, for me, but to also to share those teachings with other people. So my work is really community driven. So I work with mentor Sean Patty is my mentor, Leah Mata Fergua is my mentor. She's a really renowned regalia maker. She's chumash and also shell maker.
I had her son on.
Yeah. And she's who else am I working with? And Julina is also I work with Julina as well. And then I have my hide teacher, my hide tanning teacher. He's not a Native guy, but I looked for a long time for a Native person. I'm like, who's doing this in California Native community? I couldn't find anybody.
That's crazy.
And then a friend of mine was like, I know this guy. Like, he's not Native, but he's legit, you know. And he's amazing. His name is Jay Sliwa, and he lives up in Bodega, and he's basically been living on the land off grid his entire life. And he's like the kind of, he does it all. He has like, he lives in a like a circle house,
yurt,
not a yurt, but it's basically kind of like how to say it?
This man built himself a roundhouse. Nice.
Yeah, it's a roundhouse, and he logged all of the trees.
That's
by
sick.
Like, just, you know, I think he might have used a chainsaw, but he didn't use any big equipment, and he brought it to the site, built his house. He lives off of you know, there's no electricity there. They're groundwater fed surface water, and he has all the skills. Like, he can hunt everything. He grows his own food. He collects his own food straight up off the land. And super knowledgeable, high tenor, and an amazing person with a heart of gold. Really, really, just really legit and authentic, and very knowledgeable. So he's been my high teacher for 10 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool. And how do you like doing the hide stuff? Is that?
Yeah.
Do you like do it? Obviously, it's like hard to choose, but what would you like rather be doing, the hide or the top knots?
I like them both. You know, like working with feathers is really regal, and the feathers are like, you know, they're amazing. But the hides are really laborious for a person that's just starting. It takes about 3 solid days of work, 8-hour days, and you're like just working it hard. And he can do it in one day. He can do it like a hide or 2 hides in one day, but that's impossible for people that are just
just got the
he's got the technique, you know. And he's not a big guy either. He's kind of a small guy, you know. But like, you have to be very physically fit to do it, and you have to be you know, you have to be strong. And so it's something that just takes a lot of labor. But the reason why I love that process is because you really, really start to understand when you're tanning a hide, when you're putting so much work into it, how why it's so sacred and so special, the material, right? Like you really get intimate with the skin of the animal. And, you know, in an ideal world, it's like you also are, the meat is nourishing you and the skin is clothing you.
Man.
And you're intimately connected into what that means and how we live, you know, side by side with our animal cousins. And like it after the process of 3 days of doing that, you just know why it's sacred. You know,
that must feel amazing.
It's just like, it's not something you can just go to the fabric store and buy that, or you can just order it on, you know, Tandy Leather or whatever. You're like, man, I spent 3 hard ass days. I was like, I wanted to give up. You know,
feel it.
Yeah, you feel it, all your muscles, your back, and everything. And then by the end, you're like, you see your hide, and it just feels, you just feel so connected to it, and so gratified by the process, and so respectful of the animal that gave its life up for that. And you know, like, I think what's hard for me about it is that I'm mostly vegetarian. Now in my life, I'll eat meat that's wild hunted or that someone raised themselves. And I have been present for the harvesting of an animal and helped to process the animal and remove the skin. But I don't eat a lot of meat, and I also really sensitive around just the death of the animal. But I also feel like, you know, making regalia is how we honor animals to live in their life after their death. So there's a process that feels like sad and a little bit, you know, we give song and ceremony to that animal and prayer and thank it for offering, you know, its feathers or its hide to us. And then you're like intimately connected to that animal, you know?
Yeah. So
the feathers, I love working with feathers because they're beautiful, but the hide, really, the experience of tanning a hide is just like life-changing. For me, it was life-changing. I was just like, this is so important. Like, I want people to know what this experience is like, you know?
Yeah.
And that's why with my regalia project, what I'm doing is like, it's not just about me making the stuff, you know, it's about me making opportunities to share it with community. And that's really the goal, is like, how can I take the resources that I'm able to gather and then create opportunities for people to experience and learn this too.
That's 100%. What hides are you usually working with?
The hides are deer hides, and you know, there's the I guess the species of deer. We should figure that out, because I don't know. But they're native to California, and I've worked with a Thule elk before too, which are really big.
Huge.
Yeah, huge. I've also worked with a sheep hide, which I also really love, and I did that because I was just like, I really want a sheep hide, you know, but like I don't want to buy one from online, and they're in the communities that I work in, like the skills communities, you can buy them for someone, but they're like $300 or $400, you know. Yeah. But after you tan one, you're like, oh, I can't let this go for, you know, if you're gonna sell it, it's like, it's worth that. But I was like, I'll just do one, you know. So I met a teacher who was willing to teach me, and you know, did a sheep hide, and I freaking love it. I take it everywhere. I sleep on it. It's in my bed. I camp in it. You know, like when I'm doing, you know, feather work or something outside, I lay it down. You know, it's like my pillow. It's everything.
That's sick.
Yeah.
And you made that.
And I made that.
That's fucking awesome.
Yeah. And it's so dope. And I always tell people, oh, you gotta sit on it. You gotta try
this out.
Yeah.
I made that. I'd be proud of it too. I'd be showing everybody for sure.
Yeah. I also partially tanned a bear hide. Oh. Yeah.
Yo, that's crazy.
And that one's not done yet. And that one is like, so my tribe from Yosemite, Miwakampayu, Yosemite, we do bear dance. I think y'all do bear dance too, right?
I'm not sure. I was just gonna ask you about some bear dances, but I don't think so. No. Okay. That I saw it once, and that shit was like. Yeah.
So I grew up with that ceremony.
Really?
Yeah, and that was you know, it's like we do that 4 times a year in our roundhouse in Yosemite, and we have a hide that the dancer uses, and that hide is, I don't know, it's pretty old, you know, and so I think my idea with this bear hide is that like I would tan it and then like give it to my tribe, and then it could be used in ceremony.
That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
I remember seeing like the little kids doing it. It was like, they sound like real bears.
Yeah.
It's fucking insane. They have to go through a pretty like like a couple, like an intense, like, I don't know what we would call it, like.
Well, I mean, I don't know about what sort of cultural, I don't know if training is the right word.
Yeah,
but
preparation.
Preparation, yeah. But because it's not something that in my tribal group that women or female identified people do, or have done or have been given the opportunity to do. So I don't really know what that process is like.
That's kind of wild to me, to be honest, because there are female bears.
Yeah.
That exist.
Yeah.
So like.
Yeah, we really live in this cultural gender binary that sometimes I think feels like it's limiting.
Yeah, and like you were saying earlier, like I believe before like this colonization, I believe it was like you were saying, like two-spirit, and there's not really like a male and female, like there was people that tapped into the feminine and masculine things because everyone had to like contribute, so it didn't, you know. So like and on reservations, it's like really like homophobia is like huge.
Yeah.
And that's like crazy how like just like put into our heads it was, you know. And just like forgotten about like the two-spirit people and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
So it's crazy to think about, like.
Yeah, I mean, I think I do think a lot of that was informed by Christianity and by colonization, you know, because two-spirit people always existed within the community, you know, and also gender is not a binary. It's not just feminine and masculine. It's the whole spectrum of things, and each one of us represents, you know, like it's sort of a gradient, and we're all on this different place in, you know, a gradient. Like I've always felt like I identify strongly with my masculine side as much as I do with my feminine side. And I don't identify as two-spirit, but I align with two-spirit community. I work with two-spirit community in San Francisco and in the Bay Area, and I've always been a really big just ally and an enabler for that community to grow and flourish. And because I really think it's important for two-spirit people to exist within tribal communities. And they're in my own struggles, you know, it's like I was always the single girl of I have 4 brothers, and now I have an adopted brother, so I have 5 brothers, like, you know, being told, oh, you can't do this because you're a girl, you know, right? I never liked that, and I never felt okay about it. But you know, within tribal traditions and stuff, it's like, well, women do this and men do that. But well, what happens when you're somewhere else between, you know, not you don't represent just one you know, sexual identity? Then where do you go and where do you fit in? And I 100% know that in our tribal communities there was a special place for those people. And so I think a lot of the homophobia was actually informed by Christianity.
I believe so too, yeah. And it's crazy that like something like cooking is like considered feminine, but like that's like everyone needs to eat. Everyone needs to like, that's a necessity for life. So like, why is that like considered a feminine thing?
Right.
You know what I mean?
And at different cultures, I mean, that's another thing too, is like sometimes we get stuck in what our culture says is like this or that, right? Like, for example, weavers, you know, like in certain cultures, people say, oh, weaving is a feminine thing or what women do. But in other cultures, it's only what men do. And so the act itself doesn't have a sexual identity, cooking or weaving, or that's not like, it's feminine or masculine. It's what we assign it to within our cultural, you know, paradigm, and it's not an absolute. And I also think, you know, in dismantling the patriarchy too, like when we're asking for men to show up in our tribal communities, and a lot of the, you know, like I love men, and I have a great father, and I've always had like a lot of masculine energy around me. But I've seen within tribal communities, like a lot of men are absent. They're not being fathers to their children, or they're abusive to their partners, or they've created harm and inflicted harm on you know, females in their community. And we see it in the Me Too movement, right? And we see it in the absence of fathers within culture. And so, you know, we like just saying that like this role is feminine or masculine, I think is incorrect. And also we need all of it, right? We need all of the representations of the feminine, all the representations of the masculine. And in making regalia and working with hides, I've been told that, you know, that's what men do. Women don't do that. And in other tribal groups, only women do it.
That's crazy.
And so, you know, like all of these stories that we tell ourselves, I think sometimes, like under the guise of tradition, are sometimes reinforcing traumas and also like alienating really valuable people within our community. And I say that, like, you know, if for me, you know, I looked for somebody who was in Native community who knew how to tan hides that was, I thought would be a man. I never found this person. So I was like, well, if I want to make regalia, like I got to do it myself, you know? Or if you want to learn baskets and your community says, oh, well, men can't weave baskets, but nobody else is doing it, who's going to carry it forward if you don't, you know?
That's what I was talking to somebody the other day, is because he's starting to sew his own clothes in fashion. And like he was talking about that, like, people kind of look at me crazy because I'm sewing. Like, why is that? Like, eventually down the road, you may have to sew a shirt, or you may have to sew a patch on for your work or your job.
Yeah.
Like, what if there's, like, and like you're saying, what if there's no one else that knows how to do it?
Yeah.
And he, like, that's exactly what he said, is like, what if there's no women in the situation to teach you and to pass it on? Who's going to pass it on to say you have a daughter or a son that you know? So it's like.
Well, and in fashion, you know, there's a lot of really famous men fashion designers.
Yeah,
you know,
definitely.
Like, people, men exist in fashion.
Yeah, definitely. I kind of want to move on to the next question we had, is the movie that you're working on. So let's definitely talk about that. Fire, it's Control the Fire, correct?
Yeah. The title of the movie, and sometimes I'm like, should I say it? What if someone takes my title?
I know, and that's what I was like tripping. I was like, I don't know if we should talk about it, because like I don't want to give away spoilers, or I don't want to like. Yeah, well,
it's a working title, and the way it works in film is you actually have to do a title check.
Mm-hmm.
So like there might be someone might have already taken the name, and then legally you can't use it.
Yeah.
And I have this dream of like, okay, someone hasn't taken the name yet. I'm gonna go out there and buy the title of the movie before I make the movie, so no one can take my title. But that's silly. I'll just say it. The title, the working title, since I actually don't have the title name yet, is called Fire as Medicine. And it is a documentary about traditional indigenous practices of cultural burning within California to revitalize culture and also to prevent catastrophic wildfire. So the reason why I wanted to tell this story is my father Louis Parker is from Yosemite. He's a native firefighter, and he was a firefighter his whole life. And he did he fought wildland fires in and around Yosemite. And then he also was a chemical fire at Lemoore Naval Air Force Base.
Wow.
And there was a lot of Native people who were firefighters and firekeepers that came from Yosemite. And it was like, you know, men of his age like went into that field, and they were working on the land. And I have uncles that were my uncle Frankie Dominguez, who also is from Yosemite. He was a smoke jumper in Alaska. I mean, he worked in Yosemite first, but then and then my other cousins and stuff, their parents and fathers, and our tribal leader and spiritual leader was also a firefighter when they were younger. Wow. And so there's a lot of firefighters that came from Yosemite, Native people, like legit Native people, right? And they came from a time where it was like there wasn't culture attached to fire, right? Mm-hmm. It was like, okay, Smokey the Bear, fire's bad, let's put out the fire, right? And they did do control burns too. Mm-hmm. They did a lot more control burns back then than now. They're starting to do it again because California has seen that we have like all this land that we need to manage. And fire is one way that we traditionally manage the land, and how Native people and Indigenous people tended the land. We would do these burns to revitalize growth for basketry materials, for willow, for sour berries, for elderberries, and then also when you burn down the surface layer of the forest, it'll destroy like any pests that are there. So like when the acorns drop, all the bugs don't go and eat them right away. You can still come by and collect them. And so it reduces pests, and then it reduces the combustible fuels that are out there. So right now we haven't been doing that for many, many decades. And obviously we know, California is, super fire prone, and there's a bunch of wildland that's hard to tend, right? But there's been a culture of fear around fire for at least the last like 30 or 40 years. Yeah. And we've stopped those indigenous burn practices. And so this is related directly to culture, but also to, you know, to basically like caring for all of our wildlands. So that's where the main inspiration came from my dad, and like, you know, watching him be a firefighter, but also this new revitalization within Indigenous peoples groups to start cultural burning again. And I'm like, this is very unique to California, to our tribal communities, and you know, it's one way in which we can help tend the land. And right now, this film, I've been to a few cultural burns organized by Ron Good in Mariposa, my hometown, and he is he's Mono, and he does all these teachings about cultural burning. And so me and my videographer Matthew Falcon have gone and attended these, and you know, filmed a little bit, and we're like, hey, we want to make, like, we're gonna make this into a film. And then I'm not a filmmaker, but I wasn't a filmmaker, but I am now.
Now you are.
Now I am. And the project got funded by Vision Maker Media, so yeah, now I'm making a film.
That's sick. That's really fun. I mean, I'm sure you're having to deal with a lot of stress, because that's definitely like a stressful thing to get all the film, to the crew together, all that stuff, and to like so are you out doing controlled burns while you're filming and stuff like that?
Yeah, so mostly it hasn't been, you know, like a wildland control burn. It's been more of like we're clearing areas and then doing burn piles.
I see.
And then there's cultural teachings that are involved in that. So people who are talking about basketry materials, and people who are talking about food sources. And then, you know, I'm actually going to go up to Orleans. It's outside of Hoopa, and meet with the Karuk people up there, who are fire keepers up there, and do cultural teaching with them. And so what's really amazing is that, you know, being a native filmmaker, like, and someone who grew up with my community and who is also connected to fire, I'm able to like talk to these people and be like, hey, you know, like, I want to tell this story. It's really important. And people are like, yeah, we want you to tell this story. You know, like, Native people want other Native people to tell our stories.
Yeah.
And it's really important, I think, for our voice to be represented in these stories. And fire is so sexy, you know, like, lots of people want to film, and they get approached by a lot of people, and some of them are like, you know, they come with like full production budgets, and they can do like a really fancy film, and that's amazing. It's gonna be great, you know, but they're not gonna have the cultural insight that we have when we're talking about our own culture, or Indigenous culture, you know, that connection. And so my hope is really to tell the Indigenous stories around fire.
That's awesome. Because a couple of weeks ago, this is not like, we were doing controlled burning on our res, and it got a little bit out of control.
Yeah. Oh no! You had to call the fire department?
Yeah.
Shit.
And it was all over Facebook. Everyone was posting, who's burning down the res?
Right.
But yeah, that's awesome, because we've done a controlled burning up there on the res, like, since I was a kid, I think. But yeah, and it's awesome to finally get it on a TV screen and like get it to people, and like, because everything is like, people love documentaries, people eat this shit up right now.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's an awesome time to really like, and plus, like you said, with the fires, like, everyone's like really like wants to like end these fires, so like they want to look for some type of like prevention to like for these fires to keep going.
And really the prevention is multifaceted, you know, like, I don't, the story isn't going to be like, oh, we do cultural burns and it's going to save all of California. That's not really realistic, but I think, you know, and what I'm starting to learn about working in documentary and people that I've met who are Native filmmakers in documentary is like, there's a real, it's really hard to tell a story that's not just like the trauma and the tragedy, right? And when I wrote this, they call it a treatment, because like, I can't predict what you're gonna say if I interview you, right? But like, I can kind of make an outline of what I think I want, like, think the story is gonna be by what I know about you, right? And what I know about the whole scenario. And the story was never a tragedy of like watch California burn, but it was more of like, you know, the hearkening back to these traditional practices is one piece of how we can address this problem, right? and it's multifaceted, and I don't want to be like doomsday, but also too, with global warming and stuff, I probably will pass away before the worst of it comes, but I don't know that we can like save the world in the direction that it's going, but at the same time, like, how can we live our lives without trying?
It would be have to like, we'd have to have like a drastic change, and I really don't think with capitalism being the biggest thing in our country, I don't see it happening.
And I think that's also why people feel a romantic, and us too, ourselves too, like feel a romantic calling back to traditional practices, because we think that we lived in this way where it's like, okay, well, things were more in balance, right? Mm-hmm. And it's true, we did, and the reason why we did is because we weren't in this hyper industrialized society that was like basically, now we're just taught to like work to the bone to consume and to buy, and the rate of consumption, the earth cannot keep up with our rate of consumption, of natural resources, of eventually, ultimately all of it that we're extracting is a natural resource, right? And it's commodified in some way, and someone is getting rich off of that. And we're fed these ideas, especially in America, that like participating in this capitalist system is what we are meant to do. This is the goal in life, right? Like how much wealth can you acquire? How much, can you consume? We're taught it in every single way. Like shop at the grocery store for more food than you actually need to eat, like buy more clothes than you actually will ever wear in your life. Like your jeans are going to outlive you. And like, why do you need another pair unless your body changes like drastically, And but all of the whole meaning of the American life is around consumption, and that is because that is feeding the capitalist system, which is feeding people, mostly white people, power, very small percentage of powerful white people to just get richer, and we're extracting all the resources of the planet to do that, and we're kind of in this cycle. And I think like with indigenous life ways, we didn't do that, and we didn't live like that. And I think it's sort of a fantasy to think we're going to get back there, but I do think that we can do things within our life and live in a way in integrity and balance, more so than what we're doing now, right?
100%. And the capitalist system was definitely made up for Masons, white people, for those people that don't know. And that kind of moved me into, that's perfect, because that moved me into my next question, is what does land back / decolonize mean to you? Yeah. So you kind of already touched on decolonize, and we can get more into it too, but let's start with land back. Okay.
Yeah. So I it's hard being a California native, especially someone who, there's some people that have a lot of resources. California native people have resources. They come from a tribe that, they get big per cap. They can buy new cars. They can get drunk and wreck those cars, buy a new car, buy a mansion, get, plastic surgery, buy whatever the heck you want,
And that's what's people's like image of natives. These California tribes that got money, and not everyone got money.
And that's not the case for most people, right? And so California is literally one of the most desired land places in the entire world. To be a homeowner or property owner here is like unreachable for most people, right? And so we're stuck in this system of slavery where we have to just keep working these mundane jobs just to pay rent, just to barely exist, right? So the dream of being a landowner without having a lot of money is almost impossible. And also, land ownership is a colonial construct. Like we didn't live like that. Mm-hmm. You didn't own the land. You lived with the land. You can own the trees. You can own the water. You can own the soil. This concept of land ownership is a colonial concept. But the place that we're in right now, in order to like survive, like we kind of got to get a piece, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think land back is really important for tribal groups, even if it's just like you get a small little piece to be like, this is my land, this is where I'm from. But I also think that land back can take many different forms. So it's like, how do you steward and take care of that land? Maybe you don't own it, but you know it intimately, and you spend time on it, and you know what plants grows there, and where the cycle of the animals, and you collect from there. You collect wild fruits from there. You collect basketry materials from there. I think land back in an urban setting could also mean like farming and growing food for community. I think land back for, you know, in an urban community could mean like, you know, having a community space where people come and gather and where we share music and song and art and, you know, and create contemporary culture together.
Yeah.
Like land back can mean that too, you know, and land back for, in regards to the film, the fire film is like re-indigenizing the land with these cultural burn practices, right? And we didn't, you know, we haven't done that for a long time. Your tribe did it, and I think like that's not the case for every tribe or every area. And you know, that's great. And also, you know, the land back can be in regards to the Regalia project, like I have to intimately be connected to the cycles of land, like the animals and the plants that I use in regalia making. I have to, you know, either connect with people who are interacting with animals all the time, or I have to do that myself. And so to me, that's also a form of land back. Like I'm living in cycles with the natural elements and creating from the gifts that they give me.
That's so amazing yeah. Like I'm taking away so much from this conversation. Like it's amazing because not a lot of people like do cool things like this, you know, and not a lot of people like, and like this conversation is really gonna be like, I'm gonna take away a lot from this. Yeah, this is wild. I'm trying to like process everything that like you're saying, like, because this is crazy, you know. Capitalistic lifestyle is like wild, and I love that you talk about urban or natives in urban settings too, because people tend to like forget that we exist in urban settings too.
Yeah.
And like it's kind of getting out there with urban native wear or era, with their stuff being in REI, which is amazing. But yeah, even myself, because I grew up on the res and like moving to Santa Cruz, there's not a lot of natives out here.
No.
So and when I'm hearing about the Alamutsan tribe and stuff like that, it's like wow, like I've been here for 10 years and I like haven't run into anybody.
Right.
You know, so it's amazing to see stuff like just like popping up, and yeah, I'm just really happy that things are popping up. People are starting to do things like your movie. Things are starting to do things like the other movie Chishkale. So it's like, because people really need to be informed about this stuff, and like we really need to continue these traditions.
Yeah, and you know, I mean, like I said before, you know, culture is a living thing. You know, so we as contemporary Native people, we as contemporary mixed Native people, like we have multifaceted identities that inform, you know, the art that we create, the poetry that we create, the you know, the writings, the stories that we tell, and those are that is what will become tradition. Like, you know, our future generations will look back at us and be like, those were my ancestors. These are the traditions that they taught me. It's like, wow, like looking into the future, like makes me feel a little bit sensitive. But you know, like just like we look back at our ancestors, they're gonna be looking back at us. And so for us to move forward and create art and create culture is us living our indigenous identities, you know, and it's important. And we can't, you know, some of us are born into urban environments, or we intersect or interact in urban environments. And the beauty about an urban environment is like, you know, there's like, it's like just a whole creative energies of people coming together and collaborating together, making contemporary music together, making contemporary art. Like the Shishkale movie was, you know, based on a dance piece from Bernadette Smith, but also a collaborative of a bunch of indigenous people performed on Alcatraz Island for Sunrise Ceremony, Indigenous People Sunrise Ceremony in 2018. And we collaborated with a bunch of Native people from all through the Bay Area. And it became what it was because everyone put a little piece of themselves into it, right? And, you know, we don't exist in a vacuum, and creativity isn't just, you know, like some artists work as solo people, but like your poetry that you write is informed by every lived experience that you have, you know, and you don't live and walk this world by yourself. And so it's a reflection of everything that you see and every experience you have around you, you know, and so is a contemporary dance piece, you know, like that idea comes from traditional stories that Bernadette wanted to tell about the acorn and saving the Tamanock acorn in Point Arena. But she's telling it as a contemporary dance piece. It's not a traditional dance that's happening in a roundhouse, right?
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so that's a contemporary art form of her indigenous identity, and that's just as legitimate as something that's traditional.
Yeah, that's amazing. It's her creativity just opening up, and that's amazing.
Yeah.
And I get emotional every time I'm listening to that song that we were talking about earlier. I get emotional every time I listen to it, and I'm riding to work, and I think about just like you said, the future.
Yeah.
And the shit that the shit that kids are gonna see that's coming out that the people are creating right now is gonna be amazing.
Yeah.
It's gonna fucking blow people away.
Yeah, and you're part of that, you know. And like I'm glad that you love that song because I'm not a musician, but that project all of the music was original made music, and some of the music was made by produced by Ross Kitty and also Esme Olivia, she's from Albuquerque, and she worked with Bernadette to produce the song that's in Shishkale, and I think Ross produced the song with Clarence. And you know what they did with language. So Clarence is as a language speaker, a language keeper, and Bernadette, you know, like she knows some of the language, but they researched Pomo language and then found archives and basically like created a contemporary song using traditional phrases from. I think Essie Parrish was one of the people in the track, and they, with the contemporary mixing of music, were able to just like, for example, write like a 4-line poem and then create a rhythm out of it, and then layer it into tracks with contemporary music and, you know, people playing guitar or doing a melody or a harmony, and then it became that song. And so that really inspired me. Like I want to learn language. And song is such an amazing way to learn language, right? And to keep language. So like you said, you listen to that all the time, right? And it gives you it and that is such a, like, song has an incredible ability to be able to hold language for eternity. And so from that project, I got really inspired to want to create my own songs. And like I said, I'm not a musician or a singer, but I want to do a project that is for people who are not musicians and not traditional language speakers. So we would go and do a little bit of work to, you know, write a 4-line poem or a phrase in our traditional language after we learned it, and then create a melody with it, and then work with musicians and producers like Ross and like Esme to create a song that's our song. So like I can go into a tribal community and be like, you can make a song. Let's do it. And then you see how it's layered together on a track, and you're like, damn, that's my song. That's me. That's me singing that phrase in my traditional language.
That's so awesome. And it's awesome for people to be able to hear that too. Yeah, and you don't have to like know, you know, like fluently speak your language, and you don't have to like, you know how to make music. Like we work together. And I think that's the beauty of doing community projects, is like you work together to create something bigger than yourself. You know? Yeah, and that's the amazing thing about like getting together and like being creative together. Yeah. It's amazing. Yeah. Like doing creative stuff is amazing. Like I just want to do all the creative stuff. Yeah, and you know the amazing thing about being a human is like, you know, there's no limit really. In one lifetime we can never do it all and learn it all, and like, you know, it's kind of like there's no time to waste. Yeah. And you know, I love that you as a young person are like really just going for it, and you know that's part of the resilience and need of an indigenous person in contemporary times. Like we have to intentionally do this every day, because the mainstream world will suck us up into just, you know, the white colonial capitalism that it wants us to like assimilate to, right? Yeah. And unless you take an active role in rebuilding culture and making your unique voice heard, that will never be known to anyone else. That would never be heard unless you choose to do that. Mm-hmm. And you know, like what's amazing about this time in the world is that I feel like there's a really beautiful renaissance within Native community where we're all coming together and sharing the knowledge with each other and inspiring each other and rebuilding culture together. And it's a pretty freaking amazing time to be alive and be an Indigenous person.
person.
It's pretty dope to scroll like Instagram and TikTok and just seeing other native creators out there just doing their thing. Like literally, like it's amazing. Like I just connected with random people on TikTok just to interview them and connect. And they're in Seattle, Washington. They're in New Mexico. So it's like we're all coming together and, like you said, just doing it.
Yeah.
Like we're making it fucking happen.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that was all of the questions I had for you, unless there was any other topics that you wanted to bring up.
Oh, I could talk forever, but
yeah. I think that was the entirety of the questions I had. Thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it. And thank you for everyone that watched or is going to watch, because I usually do this live, but we switched it up. But yeah, thank you guys out there for joining Burn the Wagon, where we're here to burn the wagon that's capitalism, patriarchy, and above all else, colonialism. So thank you again, Tasina, for joining me today, and peace out.
Yeah. Yahui.
Yahui, thank you.